the spy who infiltrated the royal guard, and the veteran who saw through him. Welcome to the channel, where real discipline meets untold mystery. If you love true stories wrapped in suspense, you're in the right place. Before we dive into today's chilling tale from behind the gates of Buckingham Palace, take a second to comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing our global story-loving family grow. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story might just be our most gripping one yet. You won't want to miss it. Ready? Let's step into a world where silence speaks louder than words. It was just past noon at Buckingham Palace. The sun filtered gently through scattered clouds, casting long shadows across the parade ground. Tourists lined the gates, selfie sticks raised, voices echoing in a dozen languages. Cameras clicked, children squealed, and in front of it all stood the Queen's Guard, unmoving, unreadable, and seemingly untouched by the chaos around them. Among them stood Sergeant Thomas Keaton, a seasoned guardsman with 12 years of service. Behind those polished boots and stone-cold eyes, his red tunic was spotless, brass buttons gleaming in the sunlight. His bearskin cap towered above his head, almost 2 feet tall, as if it too stood at attention. His rifle was steady, his breath measured, his focus unshaken. He'd stood through snowstorms and summer heat waves, through jeering tourists and screaming school groups. He'd stood during royal visits and national mourning, and through it all, he'd never flinched, never blinked at distractions, never once broke form. Until today. At first it was faint, so faint it might have been imagined, but his instincts told him otherwise. A laugh, short, soft, oddly placed. It wasn't the laugh of a child or a tourist behind the gates. It wasn't carried by the crowd or echoed through the palace speakers. No, this sound had come from somewhere, far closer, inside the perimeter. From within the ranks, Keaton's eyes didn't move, but his pulse ticked upward. No one spoke during duty. No one laughed. Laughter was impossible. Every soldier had been drilled, broken down, rebuilt into vigilance. It wasn't just a rule, it was identity, and yet, that sound had happened. His training kicked in instantly. Stay still, think fast, observe everything. Without turning his head or breaking stance, he began scanning through peripheral vision. The guards were spaced in precise intervals. Uniforms exact. Stances identical. And yet something felt off. 3 positions to his left, a man stood slightly too stiff, too rigid, not with military poise, but with conscious tension. He was new, one of the younger recruits. On the surface, his uniform was immaculate, but his breathing was just a half beat behind the rhythm. His right hand twitched once every 15 seconds, almost undetectable to an untrained eye. But Thomas wasn't untrained. He began to time the pattern. Watch the movements, measure his own stillness to anchor comparison. Keaton knew he couldn't speak, couldn't even glance, but he also knew what his instincts told him. Something wasn't right. The most dangerous thing in a battlefield wasn't the loud bang. It was the soft click before it. And that laugh, that misplaced quiet chuckle, was a click. Was it nerves? An unauthorized recording device? Or something more dangerous? As the crowd cheered for the changing of the guard, Thomas remained rooted in place. But mentally, he was already 10 steps ahead. He began a subtle heel tap, a signal used only by the most experienced guardsmen, a centuries-old, unofficial method to alert others in the line, a language of silence passed down through shared discipline. 2 taps. Pause. 1 tap. Across the square, another guard responded. Barely. But enough. They would watch. Wait. Confirm. Thomas Keaton wasn't just holding a rifle today. He was holding a puzzle, a sound that didn't belong. A stranger wearing the skin of tradition. And in a world where every inch of movement is deliberate, even a laugh, barely heard, can unravel everything. Thomas didn't sleep well that night. He lay in his barracks, eyes fixed on the ceiling, mind replaying every second of the shift. The laugh echoed again in his memory, not loud, not long, but deeply wrong. And the face of that recruit, too calm, too polished, like someone rehearsing a role instead of living a routine. He had no proof, just a sound, a twitch, a gut feeling. Earned over a decade in the Guard, but gut feelings don't go in reports. At roll call the next morning, everything looked normal. The young recruit, Private Harris, stood in line, uniform crisp, boots shined to regulation standards. His salute was perfect. His silence too perfect. Thomas approached carefully, casually. He asked Harris about his training, his previous posting. Harris gave clean answers, too clean. Dates memorized, details vague. He claimed to have transferred from the Welsh Guards. But when Thomas mentioned an old friend from that unit, Harris blinked too long before responding. That was the second red flag. Later, during rifle inspection, Thomas noticed a subtle inconsistency. Harris's SA-80 rifle was the right model, but the serial number seemed off, starting with a prefix assigned to a training batch, not ceremonial use. That was odd. Not enough to raise alarm, but enough to push Thomas further. He needed to watch this man in action. The next changing of the guard was scheduled for Thursday morning. Thomas made sure his name was rotated into the same line as Harris. During pre-deployment briefings, he barely spoke, watching Harris out of the corner of his eye. Every movement was textbook, but lacked rhythm, like an actor nailing the steps, but missing the soul. And then it happened again. Halfway through the ceremony, just as the band finished God Save the King, there was another sound. Not a laugh this time. A faint click, like a button pressed. It came from Harris's direction. Thomas froze. He felt the hairs on his neck rise. Was it a recording device? A trigger? He didn't react visibly. He couldn't. But in that instant, Thomas made a decision. He initiated what few guardsmen ever have to use, the silent distress protocol. 3 taps with the right heel, followed by a half-second delay, and then 1 tap more. It's not in any manual. It's an unofficial code passed from senior guards to those they trust. Across the square, Corporal Lanes, an old colleague, caught the signal. He blinked once, slowly, signaling understanding. They were in motion now, without moving an inch, as the ceremony concluded, and the public cheered. The soldiers returned to formation. Harris stepped with mechanical precision, but Thomas noticed he kept touching his collar, just a thumb and forefinger every few minutes, like he was adjusting something. Back in the barracks, Thomas requested to check Harris's rifle again. Harris hesitated. "Standard's already been done, sir." "Let's run it again," Thomas said, voice calm but firm. That's when Harris tensed. His smile didn't break, but his fingers twitched at his collar. Thomas didn't wait. He stepped in, grabbing Harris's shoulder, twisting him toward the wall. 2 security officers moved instantly from the hallway. Within seconds, Harris was restrained. What they found inside his tunic chilled the room. A micro-recorder. Thumb-sized, wired just beneath the collar, with a tiny switch disguised as a uniform clasp. It had been active for days, capturing internal palace conversations, routines, schedules, everything. He wasn't a guardsman. He wasn't even British. Under interrogation, his real accent slipped. He was trained, embedded, and almost flawless. Almost. But he made one mistake. He laughed. And Thomas Keaton heard it. The interrogation lasted for hours, but Thomas wasn't in the room. He didn't need to be. He'd done his part. Now he stood silently just outside the palace security wing, arms crossed, the echo of that laugh still replaying in his mind like a taunt. They'd confirmed it. Harris, or whatever his real name had slipped through with forged documents, a surgically crafted background, and a level of confidence that only came from months, maybe years, of preparation. He was no rookie. He was an operator, an infiltrator, a man with a mission, but even the best crack under pressure. That night, Thomas was called into a closed-door meeting with senior security staff and 2 plainclothes agents from the UK's Internal Intelligence Service. "We're dealing with something bigger than a rogue spy," one of them said. This was a dry run. Testing vulnerability, palace patterns, radio frequency ranges, reaction time, everything. Thomas nodded slowly. He almost got away with it. Because he studied the routine, the agent replied. But he didn't. Study the rhythm. That hit Thomas hard. Rhythm. It was true, guards didn't just follow orders. They lived a cadence, a pattern of breath, step, silence. An imposter could wear the uniform, but he couldn't fake the feel of it. Not forever. The next morning, Thomas woke early. He dressed the same way he always did, precisely, methodically. But something had shifted. The guard was shaken, whether anyone wanted to admit it or not. Their discipline had been used against them. He found himself at the armory examining rifles, more carefully now. He looked at each serial number, the angle of the bolts, even the polish on the trigger guards. Then, out of habit more than suspicion, he checked Harris's gear one more time. That's when he noticed it. The boots. The soles were regulation. On. The surface. But the tread was worn in a very specific pattern. The outside edge more eroded than the center. Not normal for palace duty. More common for someone who walked tilted, slightly uneven terrain, like gravel roads. Forward operating. Bases, military boots. Combat-style wear. And then it hit him. Harris had claimed to be ceremonial, but those boots told a different story. This man had real field experience, probably special ops. That meant whoever sent him had access to military training pipelines, and that meant there were more. Thomas brought the boots to the intel officers that afternoon. "You said he was the only one," he said. "I think you're wrong." They examined the evidence, ran it through their systems. Sure enough, an old hit popped up from a classified NATO watch list. Years ago, an operative had been captured, trying to infiltrate a secure zone in Germany using the same walking pattern, same build, similar alias construction, different country, same method. "We've got a protocol breach," the agent said grimly. "This isn't just an isolated case, this is organized." By dusk, the palace grounds were crawling with plainclothes officers. Quiet security sweeps were ordered. Guards' IDs were re-verified. Equipment double-checked. And Thomas? He stood, back at his post, rifle in hand, spine straight as ever, but now with eyes sharper, more alert. He scanned the crowd, not for noise, not for movement, but for rhythm. Because now he understood something deeper. The danger wouldn't always come in shouting or in gunfire. It would come quietly, calmly, wearing the right colors, speaking the right way. Sometimes the real threat stands in line with you, and sometimes all it takes is one trained ear to stop it cold. 3 days passed. Everything looked normal again. At Buckingham Palace. The tourists returned, the cameras flashed, and the Queen's Guard resumed their rigid choreography. But beneath the surface, the tension remained. Every man on duty knew now. An enemy had stood among them and no one saw it coming, except Thomas Keaton. He hadn't spoken much since the arrest. Not out of pride, not out of fear, but focus. His instincts were still prickling. There was something unfinished about the whole thing. Loose ends. And then he saw it. During a morning inspection, a new recruit, Private Langley, adjusted his gloves twice during briefing. Not odd on its own. Gloves shrink in the cold. But he did it while no one else moved. And he did it after, looking at Keaton as if waiting for something, that stare. It was quick, less than a second, but enough. Thomas didn't blink. He'd seen it before. A flicker of familiarity behind the eyes, like someone trying to remember a line they'd rehearsed. Later that afternoon, Thomas returned to the security office and requested access to the training footage of Langley's first week. Every recruit was monitored during their first rotation on royal grounds, mostly for review and adjustment. The footage showed Langley performing flawlessly. Too flawlessly. His posture, straight out of the manual. His turns, mechanical, his stillness, time to the second. And that was the problem. Real guards learn by feel, not stopwatch. But Langley, he was executing movements like choreography, not instinct. Every action was calculated. Thomas leaned in, replaying the clip. That's when he caught it, barely visible, but there, a shadow reflected in Langley's polished boots during drill. Second pair of feet just behind the corner of the frame. Someone else was in the room, someone not logged in the training records. He paused the video, zoomed in. A coat sleeve, navy blue, gold trim. Not a trainer, not security. Someone else, entirely. Thomas stood up, grabbed the printout, and rushed to Major Ferris, the guard's internal affairs officer. There's another one, he said plainly. Someone inside the palace, not in uniform, watching our recruits during their most vulnerable hours. Ferris looked at the image, face darkening. You sure this isn't one of ours? I'm sure, Thomas said. Langley isn't just trained. He's been rehearsed, and whoever this is, he's the director. Ferris picked up the phone. Within an hour, palace surveillance logs were pulled. Cross-checks began. Access cards reviewed, and the truth was worse than anyone expected. The man in the reflection wasn't an outsider. He was an assistant technician, part of the palace's internal comms maintenance team. Someone who had clearance, someone who could walk into camera blind spots, someone invisible because he was supposed to be there. The palace had been compromised from within. A sting was planned that night. Thomas volunteered to confront Langley during shift rotation, calmly, quietly. He walked past the recruit in the locker hall, stopped, and without turning said, "He's not watching you anymore." Langley froze. His body stiffened, not from discipline, but from fear. Then he ran. He made it down 2 corridors before armed officers tackled him. The man didn't fight, he just said one thing: "You're too late." Back in the locker room, a storage locker was forced open. Inside, another recorder, a data chip, and a handwritten map. The target wasn't the palace. It was the rotation schedule of the guard itself. Who stood where, when, how long. They weren't just infiltrating. They were planning to breach. This wasn't over. And Thomas knew now this wasn't just about silence or protocol or tradition. It was about survival. The storm broke just before dawn. Rain tapped across the palace rooftop in rhythmic pulses as clouds dragged shadows over the city. Inside the guard's operations room, tension hung thick. Every screen, every file, every voice carried the same urgency. They're coming. We just don't know when. The data found in Langley's locker wasn't just detailed, it was surgical. Every name, every shift, every vulnerability in the guard's rotation had been charted. Whoever was behind this had spent months, maybe years, preparing. It wasn't a rogue actor. It was a system. Major Ferris paced across the room, voice low but sharp. We have a breach plan, outlined by our own routines. We're not just exposed, we're predictable. Thomas Keaton stood near the window, arms crossed, rain casting streaks across the glass. He didn't speak. He was listening, watching, thinking. He reviewed the map again, tracing the red ink that marked the western gate, a section often manned by newer guards, with thinner surveillance coverage due to renovations nearby. That was the entry point. They're not going for a direct attack, Thomas finally said. This isn't about stealing artifacts or breaching a vault. Ferris looked up. Then what is it? Thomas tapped the paper. Symbolism. He had seen it before. In war zones, in political unrest, in disinformation campaigns. Sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't explosives. It was embarrassment, disruption. A message broadcast in front of the world that says, "You're not safe. Your traditions are vulnerable. Your discipline means nothing." They want to humiliate the crown, he said, in front of the cameras, in front of tourists, during a ceremony. That's when the call came in. One of the off-duty guards had been found unconscious in his flat, drugged, his uniform missing. It was happening. Within 15 minutes, the entire guard was mobilized. Shifts were reshuffled. Streets around the palace were sealed off without alerting the public. And at the last moment, Thomas made one request. "Put me on the west gate," Ferris hesitated. "You're too visible now. They know who you are." "That's exactly why I should be there," Thomas replied. "Let them come to me." At 11 a.m., the changing of the guard began like clockwork. Tourists lined the gates. The band played. The soldiers marched. But this time, beneath the surface, the rhythm had changed. Thomas stood at his post, rainwater dripping from the edge of his bearskin hat. His rifle rested against his shoulder, his breathing steady, but his eyes scanned everything. 12 minutes in, he saw it. A figure in full uniform, moving with perfect form. But the boots weren't polished right. The spacing was off by half a step. No ID badge, no visible nameplate. Thomas didn't move, but he locked eyes with the man as he passed. The man flinched. That was all it took. In a split-second maneuver, Thomas shifted. He slammed his rifle down, not to fire, but to signal. 3 sharp strikes against the stone. It echoed across the square like a drumbeat of war. Security moved fast. The imposter reached for his collar, likely to trigger a signal or a distraction. But Thomas was already on. He tackled him hard, the two crashing to the ground just outside the marching line. Gasps filled the air. Tourists raised their phones. Guards broke formation, officers swarmed. And just like that, it was over. Inside the man's uniform, another device, this time not just a recorder, but a live transmitter. The broadcast had already begun, streaming to a private server. They'd wanted the world to see them break the guard. Instead, the world saw something else. They saw one man, soaked in rain, bruised at the knuckles, standing tall as the band resumed. Its song behind him. Discipline didn't break. It answered. And in the quiet after the storm, Sergeant Thomas Keaton simply returned to position, rifle in hand, posture perfect. Because tradition wasn't the weakness, it was the shield. What would you have done in Thomas Keaton's position? In a world where silence is duty, and every movement is measured, would you have trusted your instincts on something as small as a laugh? This story wasn't just about espionage. It was about vigilance, honor, and the quiet strength that lives behind tradition. We want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Are you someone who values discipline and structure like the Queen's Guard? Or do you see yourself more in the role of the outsider, watching for cracks in the system? And most importantly, what moment in this story stood out to you the most? Your insights matter. Stories like this bring us together, from veterans and service members to everyday people who just love a good mystery with real heart. If this story moved you, challenged you, or simply kept you at the edge of your seat, don't keep that reaction to yourself. Let's start a conversation below. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story will take you even deeper into the untold.